You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold. Today we welcome in Tyler Joseph, attorney at Marko Law in Detroit, Michigan, focusing on personal injury and civil rights. How are you?
I'm doing great, Benny. How are you doing?
Good. Did we get that all accurately summarized at the beginning there?
You did. That was perfect.
All right, fantastic. Well, good to have you on. We've had, so far, this is like our third episode with the trilogy, I guess, of the Marko Law Firm. We've had John Marko a while back. His episode was released. And then Michael Jones, who should be out in a couple weeks. And by the time people listen to this, it will have already been released. So I'm assuming you know these guys. Great guys. Seem like a nice group of people to work with and trying to do the good thing for the people of greater Detroit.
I do. I know them very well.
Good. So tell us, let's start with a little background for you. Like, where did you grow up? Are you a Michigan person? Tell us.
I am a Michigan person. So I grew up just west of Lansing, kind of between Lansing and a small town called Grand Ledge. So not quite in between Lansing and Grand Rapids, but closer to Lansing.
Nice. Okay. Closer to Lansing. So you went to Michigan State, and is that correct? And you got a BS in, it's a Bachelor's of Science, right? In Fisheries and Wildlife. Tell us what led to that. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't remember how far back. I always had aspirations of becoming a lawyer, practicing law. In my first year at Michigan State, which I grew up not far from East Lansing, basically West Lansing. So, Michigan State was kind of an easy decision for me. I was familiar with the area, and that's where I decided to go. And my first year, I did all my prereqs, my basic stuff, and then I decided to do political science. And I don't remember. I think it was two. I think I lasted 2 semesters doing political science, and to be honest with you, I just hated it. It wasn't for me. I didn't enjoy it. I was only doing it as a part of the pathway to get to law school, because when I went to Michigan State, that's what everybody did. You either did philosophy or political science if you wanted to go to law school, and I wasn't into the I took a lot of classes on game theory, a lot of political science basics, and I didn't enjoy it. And I talked to a family friend who was an attorney, and he was telling me basically, law schools really don't care too much about your undergraduate degree anymore. It's very traditional. People would do, they were English majors, poli-sci, philosophy. Now more or less they kind of like diverse backgrounds, and really it's all about your LSAT score.
Man, I don't even think you got to take the LSAT at some of these schools anymore. I don't know if you've read anything about that.
Yeah, I know a couple states. Well, I know a lot of things are changing. You don't have to take the LSAT. With they're doing the, what's it called? The multi-state bar exam. So each state doesn't have its own bar exam anymore. A lot of states are adopting this multi-state exam. It's a different landscape. And I didn't go to law school that long ago. I graduated. I started law school in, would have been 13, graduated in 16, but just in the last 5-6 years, it's changed so much. It's very different.
Sure.
But anyways, yeah. So I realized I didn't have to do poli-sci, and I grew up in the outdoors. I grew up fishing. I grew up hunting, hiking, all those sorts of things, and it was kind of what interests me, now, which will help me. I never really loved school, so just to get through school, and that's what I picked. I picked wildlife biology. I graduated from the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife at Michigan
Amazing.
State.
That's wicked cool. So,
I
like, what kind of classes did you take there? Do you remember?
A lot of different stuff. So I took, fisheries biology. I took, wildlife genetics. There's a lot of different, the kind of the, what's the word I want to use? The emphasis is on management. So it's supposed to teach you, how to move into, a lot of people that study in fisheries and wildlife go on to work at state agencies or federal agencies. I worked for the Forest Service for a short time in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. That was a great experience. I got to be outside every day doing something different. And then after undergrad, I worked for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources for about a year. And, at that point, I was kind of, for lack of a better term, over it. I'd always wanted to go to law school, and I was ready to kind of start moving in that direction. But I wasn't quite ready yet. So I ended up spending a year abroad.
Right. So I want to actually. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You spend a year abroad.
Yeah. So I spent a year abroad in Beirut, Lebanon. I studied Arabic, and while I was there, I applied to law school back in the States, and I ended up getting accepted at Wayne State University Law School. I got a scholarship there, and Dearborn, Michigan, which is very close to downtown Detroit, is I believe it's still the largest Arab American population community outside of the Middle East. So I thought I'll go to Wayne State, live in Dearborn, and I'll be able to keep up on my Arabic a little bit. And that kind of worked, it kind of didn't, but that's what I ended up doing.
So to back up a little, did you have a moment, or like what made you really want to go to law school?
I don't really remember. I think I don't know if there was like a moment or if there was like a movie. I don't remember what it was,
Yeah.
but I've always liked the idea of being an advocate for somebody. I always like the idea of, pursuing something on behalf of somebody, else, fighting for something. I like the competitiveness. You have to be somewhat competitive to go into law, especially into litigation, into what I do. And you
Right.
have to have a little bit of competitive spirit. And I think that's what kind of drew me to it. And I always wanted to be a trial attorney. I never really had any interest of doing, contracts or corporate, anything of that sort.
Right.
I have friends that I went to law school with. I'm great friends with them, and that's what they enjoy. That's what they like to do. They love it. It just wasn't for me. I always wanted to be somebody who was in a courtroom in front of a judge, ultimately at trial, doing things of that nature.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing that you kind of knew that that's what the path that you wanted to take. Because some people find their area, their niche, and that's great. So I think there was like a few years between undergrad and law school. I took 1 year personally, but what? So you said you went to Beirut, Lebanon, to study Arabic. Did you have another couple years before you went on to law school?
No, so after I graduated undergraduate, I worked for a year for State of Michigan Department of Natural Resources, then
Gotcha.
another year,
Okay. Okay.
then another year in Beirut, and I came back, and if I remember right, I basically immediately started school at Wayne State Law right when I came back. So I
Gotcha.
only took a couple years off.
It's interesting. We've had like a good amount of Wayne State people either featured on lawyer stories on Instagram or on the podcast. We've had a few, so they definitely produce. Shout out to Wayne State for producing some good attorneys. So, what was your experience like in law school? I know, you did Moot Court, you did the free legal aid clinic. You were like there on a scholarship. Tell us like what it was like at the beginning, like your first day or your first week or your first month of law school. What did it feel like?
Yeah, I think most anybody would tell you. I would have to imagine that it's pretty intimidating to start off. Maybe not if you know a lot of people that are lawyers that have been through the process, if you're really familiar with it. But really, I didn't have anything close to a legal background. Like we talked about,
Yep.
fisheries, wildlife. I have some distant relatives that are attorneys, but I didn't grow up around it a lot, so I didn't really know what to expect. And there was a little bit of culture shock. Law school's nothing like undergrad, in my opinion. It was, it was a little scary, but for the most part, you get past, I'd say, first year, in my opinion, was the worst because, everybody's brand new. It's very competitive. Everybody tries to tell you that, first year of law school is make or break. You really set the tone for the rest of your law school career. And I made it through. I did it. It wasn't terribly stressful, but it was definitely one of the most stressful things I've ever done. And then after first year, I feel like it tapered off. You had more electives, you could take more classes in what you were interested in, and that's what I did. And I did Moot Court, which was great because, like I told you from the beginning, I always wanted to be, a trial attorney. I wanted to be in court, wanted to be advocating. So Moot Court was a good avenue for that. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't do mock trial. In hindsight, I wish I had. I think that would have been a great experience. I had a lot of friends that did mock trial. I didn't end up doing it. I didn't do law review. The law reviews, it's great. It looks really good on a resume. It's something that employers look for. I don't know if I regret not doing law review, but it wasn't really Moot Court was what I wanted to do. That's what really drew me in, was getting in front of, Moot Court and law school, sitting, advocating. It's appellate advocacy. You have a panel of judges, and that's the type of law that I wanted.
And there's like a procedure to get on that too. I actually don't remember. I mean, I know like you have to write on to the law review if it's not your grades or something like that. And I think Moot Court, you probably had to go up and do some appellate argument or something to get on to the Moot Court.
Yeah, I should remember, and for some reason I don't. I'm pretty sure there were tryouts.
Yeah,
there were tryouts. You had to apply, and then they had, whatever they called it, open tryouts or open court, and you had to go in, and you might have gotten like a brief or something beforehand that you had to go in and argue and field questions on. But
right,
and then
that's right.
Yeah, and then we had competitions once you got into Moot Court, and I enjoyed that. That was.
What about the free legal aid, Tyler? What'd you do there? What were you helping people out with there?
That was great. Free legal aid clinic at Wayne Law has a really, really interesting and detailed history. It goes all the way back, pre-civil rights in the 60s. They were around, they were doing work, they were doing civil rights work. When I was at the free legal aid clinic, I mostly did elder law. So we would do really simple wills, really simple deeds. They call them ladybird deeds. If an older person wanted to leave their house to somebody. We also did some family law, and that was the first time I was able to single out something and say, I do not want to practice that type of law. I realized very shortly family law was not for me. I did one course with minor children when I was in law school. In Michigan, they have a program where if you're a law student, you can practice law on kind of a limited basis.
Yep.
On the supervision of an attorney. And that's what I did at the free legal aid clinic. And I worked on a divorce with minor children, and it was rough. You got to have really thick skin to do that, because it's even more so than what I do with personal injury and civil rights. It can be very cutthroat. It's very personal. There's children involved. There's all sorts of things involved that make people very emotional. So I learned very quick that was not for me.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it takes a special kind to really be dealing with a lot of that. A lot of unfortunate issues go on with family law, domestic law. So did you have any mentors along the way?
In law school, not so much. Once I started practicing law, my first job out of law school, one of the first lawyers who hired me was and has become a very good mentor of mine. His name's Craig Hilborn, and he actually works as a consultant here at Marko Law with us.
Nice.
And he was the first real trial attorney that I worked for, and he's taught me a lot throughout the years. And I've watched him practice, watched him try cases, and it's it's interesting you bring that up, because as a young trial attorney, it's very important to find a mentor and to be able to have a mentor to work off of and to be able to observe, because law school doesn't teach you really anything about actually practicing law, especially litigation. So it's important to have that, and I was lucky enough I did have that, and I still have it.
That's awesome. And if somebody doesn't like find a mentor, like how do you think somebody can go about getting one? That's kind of a tough question, but I mean, I think some people, they sort of fall into it. It could be luck, it could be happenstance, it could be whatever. Would you suggest like somebody go work with somebody in an area that they're really interested in? Like, what would you give for advice?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do. Really, at the end of the day, you just got to put yourself out here, and if you want to try to find a job where in an area that you're interested in, and work for a mentor, or when I was a young attorney, I'm still fairly young attorney, but when I was a younger attorney, I would go to a lot of bar events. I'd go to a lot of other events where there were a lot of lawyers, and just talk to people, and you'd be amazed the amount of attorneys that are more than willing to mentor, offer advice, really, reach out and help you with whatever you need. It's just a matter of, when, especially if you go to law school in a city where you're not from and you don't know a lot of people, it's really difficult. It was difficult for me. I didn't know anybody, when I came to Detroit, and once I passed the bar and started practicing, I still didn't know a lot of people. But by going to events, just talking with people, you start seeing the same faces, you start talking to the same people, and it really, really quickly, you can easily be put in touch with people that practice in the area that you're interested in. And, there's potential mentors everywhere. My experience has been that, a lot of people, almost everybody that practices is willing to talk with you, give you advice. All you got to do is ask.
That's great. So why personal injury and civil rights?
Yeah, I kind of, I'd always known that I wanted to litigate. I wanted to be a trial attorney, but I wasn't ever really quite sure what area I wanted to go into. And I kind of fell into personal injury, civil rights. So my first job, I did mostly products liability, which a lot of people will say in Michigan is mostly dead now. We had tort reform back in the 90s, and
Really?
yeah, products liability, medical malpractice took a big hit for plaintiffs' attorneys. There's they instituted caps, a lot of legal hurdles. But coming out of law school, I worked with one of the attorneys that was kind of the last group of attorneys that actually did products law, and I worked with them. And I didn't really seek them out. It was just, after I took the bar, I can't remember. I must have gone on Wayne State's website and looked in to see who was hiring, and I sent out some applications, and I got called in, and we hit it off, and I got hired, and I just kind of fell into it.
That's awesome. That's cool that Wayne State had a website like that you could find a job. Like they had the postings out there. That's great.
Yep, it's very helpful.
So what advice would you have for a young litigator?
For a young litigator, in hindsight, what I wish I would have done, which even at the time I knew I should have done it, but it's about forcing yourself to make time to do it. Go to the courts, sit in on trials, sit in on hearings, just make yourself go enough to where you get comfortable in a courtroom, because it doesn't come automatically. Maybe if you grew up around it, maybe if people in your family were attorneys and you've been in courtrooms before, maybe you'll be comfortable with it, but it's an intimidating experience. And now post COVID, a lot of stuff is still via Zoom. In Michigan here, we're back to, trials are in person. A lot of important motions are in person, but some of your day-to-day stuff is still done via Zoom. When I first started, everything was in person, and you'd be in motion call, and there'd be a courtroom full of attorneys, and you'd have to be up there arguing your motion in front of a judge who may or may not have sympathy for you being a young attorney. And it's nerve-wracking. And I did it, and you get over it, and you get beat up in the courtroom, and you feel terrible about it, and you're dismayed, but you get through it, and you learn that it's just par for the course. And if I had any advice to give, I'd say, go to the courthouse, sit in on trials. You can talk to the clerks, get the dockets, you can know when trials are going to go, and you can go sit in on them and just watch and see how the attorneys perform, watch the jury, listen to the judge. And anything that you can do to get comfortable in a courtroom. So, once you graduate, get licensed, it's not complete culture shock. You're not walking in the courtroom for the first time, with a pile of motions in your hand that you got to go argue.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, to go watch and try to see what's up. You never know who you're going to meet. Go with a stack of business cards. Hey, I'm a 2L, I'm a 3. But yeah, I think that is great advice. Thanks, Tyler. So what makes working at Marko Law so unique?
Marko Law I worked at quite a few different firms, and I know a lot of people that work at different firms. And the unique thing about Marko Law is we are at Marko Law, it's all about the litigation process. So I'm thinking about how I want to word this. There are some firms out there where they have a lot of cases and they settle a lot of cases, but at Marko Law, we're really centered around litigating, trying cases, really pushing it to the end. Whenever you take on a case, the end game is always trial. You got to look into the future and say, if I'm going to try this case, what are the issues that I'm going to have? And at Marko Law, we really strive to push it that far. Do cases always go to trial? Obviously not. That's a big investment. But do some cases have to be tried for one reason or another? Sure. And, we're ready to try them. And, not a lot of law firms can always say that. You ask John or anybody else here at Marko Law, how many cases does everybody try a year? It's going to be multiple cases, where
right.
That's not always the case with other firms. And so we're really centered around litigation, centered around trying cases. That's what we strive to do. That's what we enjoy doing.
Yeah, for sure. And John's involved with Trial Lawyer University, right? I mean, how are you involved with Trial Lawyer University and not want to try cases?
Exactly.
Have you been involved with that yet? Have you gotten over there?
I did. I went to my first Trial Lawyers University event. It was this past summer in Vegas, and nice. that was amazing. Just the setup.
The event or Vegas was amazing. Which one?
The event. I honestly, you know what? That was my first time in Vegas, and it was a little underwhelming. I don't know.
It's so funny, man, because I've been to Vegas once, and that is the exact same word I've used to say it. And you know why? Because there's this sign that you see on all the movies, "Welcome to Vegas," and then you go stand at it, and it's like so short. When you think it's going to be this like huge sign that you take a photo at, and it's like this little anyway. But I understand what you're saying. I'm not a huge gambler anyway, and whatever. So
yeah, no, I mean Vegas was all right. I mean, it wasn't anything. Like I said, it was just a little underwhelming. But the event, the Trial Lawyers University event, that was awesome. The way they had it set up, and all the heavy hitters that you had out there, really real trial lawyers talking about, how they approach different things, how they handle different things. It was really eye-opening. It was great. I mean, I remember all the materials that I got from there, all the notes that I took. I still review that stuff because that's
awesome.
It's so great to just see how. And another interesting thing about it was there were so many attorneys from different parts of the country, and you saw so many different styles of lawyering. And, it's not like one style stood out and those were the types of lawyers that got the big verdicts and were really successful. I mean, you had attorneys from the Midwest, Wyoming, Montana that would come in, they're dressed in jeans and a flannel, and they talked about their trials and, their philosophies, and, they're getting multi-million-dollar verdicts, just as the guys from out east in the expensive suits who walk in talk about their philosophy and what they do at trial, and they're also getting multi-million-dollar verdicts. So it was amazing to see the different types of lawyers and individuals and how they approach trial, and they all get great results.
That's awesome. I'm glad you had a good experience. It sounds really great. So, excuse me. Tell us about your practice a little bit there. Like what's the first thing you do when a case comes across your desk? Somebody just like you wake up, you come in and they're like, hey, here's a file. Like, just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I learned a long time ago what the first thing I got to do when I get a file is, if I can't get the client into the office, I at least got to get them on the phone and talk to them, because there's only so much you can glean from, getting the file with the police report in it, maybe some medical records. You really got to pick up the phone or get the client, preferably in person,
Yeah.
and talk to them. And the other thing that I've really learned as I've been practicing, I've learned a lot from John, is that, as young attorneys and in law school, you're really taught to focus on liability. Like, if it's a car accident, you got to figure out, oh man, if we go to trial, how am I going to prove that it was the other driver that ran the red light and not my client? And that's important. You definitely have to do that. But the other part of the process is damages and looking at,
Right.
your client's injuries, and it's even more than looking at the medical records. With auto cases in Michigan, we have a no-fault system. And in order to sue an at-fault driver, you got to show what we call threshold injury. So it's, if somebody comes in with garden variety whiplash, a lot of times that doesn't get you the threshold to be able to bring a claim against the third-party driver. The standard is, a part of the standard is showing that the injuries have impacted your client's ability to lead their normal life. And so that's really taught me to get clients in, talk to them about, even the simple things, that a lot of people don't think about. Like, maybe it's harder for this person to make their bed in the morning. Maybe they can't, pick up their grandkids. And those are the types of things that I've learned along the way. Those are the types of things that you need to really focus on at the end of the day, because those are the things that juries are going to want to hear. You get a case in front of a jury and you just explain to them, well, it was the other guy who ran the red light and my client broke their arm and now we want $300,000. It doesn't.
Yeah.
You really got to tell a story, and you really got to, lay it out for a jury how these injuries have changed their life permanently. And that's harder than it sounds. And that's part, and then another part of why working at Marko Law is so great, because we really emphasize, developing that story, your client's story, about not only what happened to them, but how that event has impacted their life, their day-to-day life, even in the most minuscule ways, and how it's every day. It hurts when they bend over to pick up the laundry, or they can't pick up their grandchild, the little things like that. Those are
Right.
the things that stick with juries.
So do you guys like go into each other's office and like throw ideas off each other and say, hey, like this is what I'm thinking, like what do you think about this theory, like that sort of thing?
All the time, every single day. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I was just talking to somebody about this. During COVID, when for the most part, I was working at a different firm at that time, but everybody was working from home for a long
Right.
time, and we weren't in the office. And that was difficult, because it's, you get a new file and you got an issue, and I run out the office, I go into someone else's office, whether it's John or Michael's, and I say, hey, let me run this by you, let me throw this at you. And you spend maybe 15-20 minutes talking about it, and you might walk out of the office with a completely different view of that case.
Wow.
Or a completely different idea of how you want to pursue it. That's not only something we do on a day-to-day basis. I think it's a necessity at any law firm.
That's
It
awesome.
really is. Yeah.
That's really awesome. Tell us a little bit about the civil rights piece of your practice. I know we talked a little bit about personal injury, like, you don't have to like mention any specific cases, but I feel like civil rights is like a really cool thing to get into, but it's also probably pretty difficult. like to get into because a lot of people want to do it and they want to do for the good and represent people. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I first started practicing, all of my work was personal injury, and then I started working for John. And John, a big part of his practice is civil rights, so that's where I first got exposure to that, and it's definitely a different animal. It really is. With civil rights cases, you're almost always suing the government, and in most states, including Michigan, the government has uh, qualified immunity. So it's not like you can sue
Right.
the the Detroit Police Department or the Michigan Department of Corrections like you can an at-fault driver. It's not just a negligence standard. There's a million hoops you got to jump through, very high standards, and it's definitely a different animal. And I've been doing civil rights for probably 3 or 4 years now, and I really enjoy it. It's a little bit different because not only is the liability different, like I was talking about, but the damages are different too. So, like
Sure.
with a car accident where somebody injures their back, that's obviously a type of injury, a type of damage that you're going to want to develop for a jury. But with a civil rights case, a lot of those damages come from the violation of the right itself. So, if someone violates your First Amendment right, if a police officer violates your Fourth Amendment right to, if they perform a unconstitutional search and seizure of that nature, it's how do you assign a monetary value to the violation of that right? That's a whole different beast. Developing those damages with a jury and showing them that the conduct, warrants a recovery. And it can be harder because sometimes you don't have those physical injuries like you do in a personal injury case.
Right.
But sometimes you do, if it's an egregious enough case, like a
Do
police
those go to
brutality.
trial as much as a PI case would for you guys, or no?
I'd say just as likely.
Okay.
I wouldn't say we try more PI than we do civil rights or the other way around. The one of the big hurdles with civil rights cases is that the government always gets a right to an appeal. So your litigation's always broken up by an appeal right in the middle of it. So if they file a motion for summary judgment and it gets denied, they get an automatic right to the Court of Appeals. So that a lot of times will add at least 6-8 months, if not more, on a litigation. So in that sense, they're sometimes harder to get to trial just because it takes more time. But I wouldn't say PI versus civil rights, either one goes to trial more often than the
Gotcha.
other.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. What advice would you have for someone who wants to get into civil rights?
You got to find a firm that does it and they're good at it, and you got to try to work there. I mean, with both PI and civil rights, all that I know is from doing it, from litigating those cases and watching John and other attorneys in the office litigate their cases. It's litigation is something that it's baptism by fire. You just got to do it. You can read the Restatement of Torts a million times. You could read, Section 1983 civil rights law a million times, but it's not going to teach you anything about actually litigating these cases. So you just got to, if that's what you want to do, find a firm in your state that does it and apply, work there, watch what the other attorneys do, handle your own files, and just keep pushing forward.
Awesome. So, Tyler, is there anything we left out today? Like anything you want to talk about, or like any advice you want to give to the Lawyer Stories community?
I don't think so. I mean, it's being a lawyer has really opened my mind to a lot of things, and at the end of the day, most lawyers come to the realization that it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's not something, it's not where you come in at the beginning of the day, leave at the end of the day. You leave your work at work and you go home. It's a profession, and you got to learn how to deal with that because you have clients, and a lot of your clients are in the worst spot of their lives. Whether it's it's a personal injury case and they're severely injured, or if it's a civil rights case and, they've been prosecuted and they can't find work or they're injured, they're in a really, really bad spot. So you got to learn, if you got to field a call at 9 o'clock at night, sometimes you got to do it. You got to learn to establish your own boundaries. But at the end of the day, being a lawyer is a 24/7 job, and you got to learn to embrace it.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. Tyler Joseph, thanks for coming on from Marko Law. We appreciate having you tonight. Stay right there. Everybody else, thanks for tuning in. Wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourselves. Cheers.